A cannabis social club, which I don't mean, your mate's dad's shed. Something far more formal than that. A members club. But look, don't rely on me for the details. Let's speak to the BBC's Fiona Trott, who's been to one of these clubs on Teesside, and she's with us now. Fiona, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Expand upon what I just said. How do these cannabis social clubs work?
Well, the club I went to in Middlesbrough said it had around 200 members. Some of them were even from North America, and they paid around £25 a year and £3 on the door. In return, they could go in, socialise with others who also used cannabis with no judgment. The club rules were you could share cannabis, not deal, and Class A's were not allowed. As you've said, the possession of cannabis is illegal, and yet the club itself is registered with Companies House, so it's registered to pay taxes. And the United Kingdom Cannabis Social Clubs say there are around 160 of these registered in the UK, and the number is growing.
So when you say share, that means no money can change between the people who are there?
Exactly so. Posters on the walls saying no dealing allowed here. But you are there to socialise with other members, your friends. If they offer you something to smoke, you'll accept it. They say that there is sharing only on the premises and no one's allowed to deal.
Okay. That's an interesting caveat because it's all illegal. So the fact that they're saying, well, we don't want to, charge because that's weird. Does that then, in a legal context, does that mean, I guess if you're selling it, then you could be arrested for conspiracy to supply, which is far more serious than possession?
And it's an interesting question because the police will turn around to you and say that, look, the whole concept of this is contrary to the Misuse of Drugs Act. And, the club I went to was even 1 mile away from a police station. It's been operating in various other locations for 4 years. So why hasn't anybody been arrested? That's the important question, isn't it? And I spoke to the Assistant Chief Constable of Cleveland Police, Jason Harwin. He's also the drugs lead for the National Police Chiefs Council. And I asked him whether resourcing was an issue.
We'd always like more resource. The reality is the more resource we have, the more we could do. The issue we have around it is this is one of many things that we have to deal with. So again, in terms of prioritisation, yes, it's an illegal offence. We will take action where we can take action. But as I said to you, by the time we find out where premises have been, it's already closed down, we're moving on to something else. Ultimately, we are speaking to them individually at the moment, so that's the important piece. The reality for us is that...
What are you saying to them? You're speaking to them individually. What are you saying
to them?
Well,
we're saying ultimately, if you go and open premises to consume drugs, you are committing an offence, and therefore, if we know where it is, we will take action, which obviously is enforcing the law.
So you're warning them?
We are, yeah. So again, what we're keen to do is prevent crime taking place in the first place. Clearly, what we're trying to say is by you taking the actions, even though you feel morally, ethically, what you're doing is right, within the law that is not right.
But the warnings aren't working, are they?
Well, and I suppose that's the question that it goes back to. In terms of the enforcement action the police service can do, clearly we have to enforce the law, but we can't act outside the law, and therefore to enforce the law we need to know where the premises are, exactly what they are doing, and are they committing criminal offences. And thirdly, ultimately, is are they in possession of drugs? Now, if we haven't got that, we can't enforce the law.
Interesting. Fiona, take us inside this Teesside Cannabis Club. What was it like?
Well, do you remember youth clubs back in the 1980s? It was a bit like that.
Okay.
The club I went to was an old office block on an industrial estate. It even had a receptionist there. There was music, 3 or 4 rooms with sofas, coffee tables and a pool table. And, of course, when you walked in, the smell hit you, as it would. Don't forget, cannabis aside, we're not used to smoking in buildings, are we, these days? Members were sitting around smoking spliffs or dabbing, which is inhaling a cannabis concentrate in a kind of bong. Everybody was very friendly.
I can imagine they were, yeah. Perhaps not particularly talkative.
Very laid back.
Yeah.
They're telling me that lawyers go there, bankers and social workers are members too.
And you spoke to some members, didn't you?
Yeah, and this is the interesting thing because, one of them drove over 80 miles after his work shift to hang out there with other members. And I asked all of them why they paid to go there. Why did they pay to be a member?
We come here so that we can have a safe environment where we know that our cannabis hasn't been street derived.
The key of it all is you want a place to enjoy it with your friends, just like you go to a pub and have a drink with your mates. People want to come and have a smoke with their mates.
What would you do if the police turned up right now and closed it down and arrested you?
Well, we'd go get arrested.
Go get arrested, we'd have to follow a protocol, we'd have to be looked at as criminals, even though we're not, we're users.
Fiona, thank you very much. That's Fiona Trott there, who went to a Teesside Cannabis Club. It's fascinating, isn't it? Also interesting, of course, that someone drove 80 miles. I hope someone drove them there, because you would ask yourself the question, well, if they're stoned and then get in a car and drive 80 miles and then something happens, then what? What responsibility does the club in question have to make sure that the people who are going there and getting baked do not walk out and start driving cars around? Look, I want to ask you a question. If cannabis clubs continue to be tolerated, as it seems they are being, is it effectively legalization through the front door? Give us a shout, tell us what you think. Now, of course, if you do go to a cannabis club and you want to remain anonymous, you can do. 08085 909 693 is the number. We can change your name if you want to call in, or you can just send us a text and not put your name on it. 85058 is the text number, or send me an email, afternoonedition@bbc.co.uk, and just put in the subject heading that you wish to remain anonymous. That's fine. Michael Fisher joins us now and runs the Teesside Cannabis Club with his partner Christine Taylor. Christine, Michael, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, all right.
Hi.
When did you set up this club? And why?
I founded the club in 2014. It was just after my father had passed away. I'd learnt about cannabis use for treatment of a stomach condition I had, and I'd learnt about the benefits that cancer patients were having using cannabis oil. So I formed the club basically as a response of my free time and in morning to try and help other people.
How many of the people who come to your club, do you think, or how many of the registered members you have are there because of existing health conditions, and how many are there just to recreationally smoke cannabis?
In the early days when I first founded the club, I would have said it was probably a 90% recreational crowd, 10% maybe medicinal. But as the work that we've done has continued on over the last couple of years, I'd say that flow's changed now to around 70%, 80% that are heavy medicinal users, in terms of they rely on it daily in every aspect of life to get them through the day without taking more serious pharmaceutical drugs. And I'd say around the other 20, 30% still use it to some degree medicinally, but recreationally also.
Is there any testing that takes place as to the strength of the cannabis that is being smoked in there?
Some cannabis that comes to the club by collective growers of the members has been tested by reputable companies, but a lot of cannabis is still just grown by members, like the collective themselves, where they're only assured by what they've put in the cannabis plant itself as to what's coming back out of it. So in effect, although it's not necessarily regulated by government, it's self-regulated by the grower themselves.
Are you not concerned that it could potentially attract a criminal element?
Obviously, there's a massive criminal element already around the world attached to cannabis and attached to drugs. That's never going to go away unless we do face it head on. Clubs like our own deal with this issue head on by attracting members to sign up and subscribe to our membership and our Club XL model. People tend to stay away from the street dealers, the black market dealers, because they know they've got a safe place where they can go and consume cannabis, and they can make links and friends with people where they can share the cannabis amongst themselves.
So what checks and balances are done on those who wish to become members, that they themselves are not essentially drug dealers looking to infiltrate a place where they can find a ready market for their wares?
We work on a vouch system if you know an existing member. So a member that we've already got that's obviously been part of the club. We've got members now that have been part of the club for 3 years, obviously. So if they're bringing a member in, that's good enough with 2 forms of ID for us to take them on. All members, when they first come in on a probation period, And obviously it's like a family, so the members take care of the club themselves, they look after each other. If there's any issues, if there's anything that anyone needs to bring attention to, it's normally raised, just like the old-fashioned men's social clubs used to be, I suppose, now where you would have a board or a committee. It's all raised and dealt with internally, and if there's a member that's been causing problems, their membership will be terminated. In terms of strangers that sign up online that don't know a member that need access to the club, we take 2 forms of ID, and once again it's the same vetting procedure once they come through to the club. We have no way of obviously being able to check if they do have a criminal record or what the true intent is, but we have people monitoring the situation. The club has CCTV in its rooms. It operates just the same as any other licensed premises would. It keeps a track of everything that's going on in there to try and minimise any extra illegal activity that's going on without needing to be going on, obviously.
Christine, what about the moral issue of illegality, of breaking the law?
Well, well, by consuming it and possessing it is against the law and things.
It's just something that's never going to go away. People are forced to use cannabis daily and break the law daily without a choice. Our club's giving people not necessarily a get out of jail free card, but it's giving people somewhere safe where they can feel they can go and consume cannabis without the fear of repercussions or judgment. And that's
there will be
important.
repercussions potentially. I mean, if a police officer walks past and decides to enforce the law, then he can come in there or certainly wait outside and nick you, can't he?
That's obviously understandable, but once again, I think this comes down to police priorities. Is it worth the police wasting taxpayers' money to come in there if somebody's consuming a small amount of cannabis that's going to result in a caution? At the end of the day, most people that consume cannabis, most people that use cannabis use it in moderate amounts. Most substances that are used in moderate amounts don't tend to cause problems and tend to cause issues. In the 4 years that the club's been operating in bricks and mortar, in the 5 years it's been in existence, we've never had no police complaints made, and we've operated from 4 different locations and been very public and visible in everything that we've done.
You say it's minor, Michael, but it is breaking the law. Now, you can't make a choice, surely, although that seems to be what's happening, about what laws decide to enforce and what people don't decide to enforce.
The police are not deciding and making the laws. The police will enforce any laws that are being broken if there's evidence to suggest that the laws are being broken. But here you say, what you see on social media does not necessarily constitute a law being broken, and obviously, unless there's actually
smoking marijuana is against the law, is it not?
Smoking marijuana is, but without evidence to suggest that this is going on, obviously it's assumed that this goes on upon the premises, and the owner of the clubs obviously say...
But I think the clue might be in the title Teesside Cannabis Club.
Obviously, yes, and this is what we're saying, but it's police resources, so is it worth the police
so they are ignoring it?
It's not them ignoring it, it's a case of there's been no complaints made, and if the resources were warranted for them to spend the taxpayers' money on coming in, I'm sure they would.
But the principle of the law is that you don't just wait until someone complains about breaking the law before you enforce it. Therefore, a police officer could walk past, smell weed coming out and say, well, I'm sorry, I can't do anything until someone tells me that's weed, even though I know it's weed, and perhaps I could look through a window and see it's weed being spoken. That's not how the enforcement of the law necessarily works, is it, Michael?
There's no smell of cannabis coming from the premises on any occasions for that to happen, but I understand what you're saying. But in terms of how the clubs operate, like I said, we're trying to change the law, we're trying to challenge the law, we're trying to bring attention to the law. It's a campaign movement that's basically been created to get people talking just like we are now.
And that's the full legalisation of cannabis, yes? Not just not purely for medicinal purposes, it's the full...
Not purely for medicinal, no, for full legalisation. We want full legalisation, but we also want full regulation. We're not asking for a free-for-all, we're not asking for a full decrim and a free-for-all for black market gangs, for criminals to just flourish, which has already happened. What we're asking for is what we're seeing over in Canada, what we're seeing over in America, what we're seeing in other countries around the world. We're wanting to have full regulation, where we can pay our revenue back into the system, and so we can benefit the schools, benefit the forces, benefit the police, benefit everyone, because this is a multi-billion-pound industry that's currently being handed over to criminals, and we're saying that we don't want criminals to be in charge of this. People like myself are trying not to be criminals. What we're trying to do is remove the stigma that's attached to this kind of thing. This is going on behind closed doors all around the world right now.
Christine, what would you like to say?
I would just like to say that by full legalisation of cannabis would benefit us in so many different ways. there's medicinal value to it. There's social aspects to it. There's all sorts to the plant itself. It doesn't just like benefit health. It benefits people socially. It is a big. It's a big benefit to
society.
To society. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I think
let's
what
take.
Christine-
Wait, let me. I just want to bring someone else just to counter what you're saying here. Trina Whitaker is with us now. Trina, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Tell us what happened to your son.
I've listened to this. I'm absolutely gobsmacked. My son started being ill when he was 17. He's now 44. He's got schizophrenia, and I am 100% sure that a lot of it is down to cannabis.
Just to be clear, he also took LSD and ecstasy, didn't he?
Yeah, but that was later.
Right.
He started off on the cannabis. Yeah.
And you can categorically say that there is a direct link between him taking cannabis and the schizophrenia that he developed, or is it an assumption on your part?
No, he started taking cannabis, and we all walk a fine line. He could have had cannabis, he could have had schizophrenia anyway, but by taking the cannabis, it just went out of all proportion.
So it exacerbated it, not created it.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
But also, I do think that cannabis has a tremendous effect on mental health, and I can't see where it does well sociably at all.
Right. But I guess you haven't been, nor would you go to a cannabis social club?
Definitely not.
Why not?
No, I can't.
But surely if you want to find out, Trina, surely you need to find out from both sides of it.
I lived with my son taking cannabis for so many years and seen what it was doing to him. It was destroying him. And then eventually he did stop with lots and lots of support. And he's still on medication, but now, after the last 6 years and everything, I've got my son back.
But why should the thousands and thousands of people who enjoy smoking cannabis day in or week in, week out, who do not develop what your son has developed, why should they be penalised because of it? And also, as well, it was pointed out by Martin, the criminality that underpins a drugs war that even some police and crime commissioners admit openly has failed. They've failed to beat this.
But these are my opinions, my own personal opinions, and I find that it really hard to understand that these clubs, cannabis clubs, whatever you like to call them, are going on. And the police, yes, they might be turning a blind eye because there's not enough resources out there. But all the trouble with our youngsters up and down the towns and the countries and cities all over England, all over the world, really. But a lot of it is down to drugs.
So why not take the criminality out of it by legalising it and therefore not allowing criminal gangs to trade?
But it will never be fully legalised, will it? There'll always be the Jack the Leads out there that want to make money.
Well, Trina, you should speak to Michael. I mean, Michael runs the Teesside Cannabis Club.
I know. Yeah, I understand what he's saying, but he's got his views and I've got mine.
Oh, indeed.
And nothing will take me away from how, when you live with somebody with mental illness and they're taking cannabis, you will take a different light on it.
I mean, Michael, how old can people be and come to one of these clubs?
You have to be over the age of 18 to attend our clubs. I'd also like to just say, Trina, I'm sorry to hear about your son. It is very unfortunate what you're saying there.
Does that not change your mind, Michael, what Trina has said?
No, I'd like to just bring up a couple of things. Currently, the figures for for schizophrenia globally are affecting roughly 1% of the population. So if we look at 1960s to now in cannabis strength, the correlation of cannabis strength and schizophrenia should rise. What we're actually seeing is it's remained roughly around about the same at 1%. So if we were to double the amount of cannabis users on the planet currently, we would still only in effect see like 98% of the population would be unaffected by schizophrenia. It's still up in the air as to whether it's actually contested as to whether there isn't a direct effect between the relationship between schizophrenia and cannabis. If cannabis is a cause for psychosis, we would definitely see an increased risk in the strength of cannabis and the amount of cases of psychosis that have been reported, and that simply isn't the case.
Trina?
But the cannabis is a lot stronger now than what it used to be.
It is, Trina.
They have all the different additives and everything to it, and it's no good.
No, that's false information, I'm afraid, Trina.
Okay.
I know that a lot of people tend to jump on cannabis and the cannabis bandwagon, but LSD is worse than a psychoactive compound. It's a hallucinogenic compound that acts upon the brain. And ecstasy is much the same. I feel that your son was always going to go down the route of trying to explore mind-altering drugs. Cannabis was the safer one in them options. If you're going to be choosing ecstasy and LSD to explore in your mind as well, that's also going to have risks. I think that any studies that are suggesting that cannabis is directly linked to psychosis and schizophrenia need to also look at contributing factors of other drugs and other substances that have been used throughout the relationship with that person, and also families' mental health, etc.
Michael, we just heard an interview, and Fiona Trott said that someone drove 80 miles to come to this. Not your particular one, or maybe your particular one. And I found that interesting because what duty of care do you have?
At Teesside Cannabis Club, we offer a safer driving scheme, where we'll have designated drivers that don't consume cannabis that will provide lifts. We have taxis. Are they within the premises of the social club? No, they're just called upon when they're needed. We also have electric bikes that are available for hire for people that live within a 15-mile radius. And we also...
Is that safe for someone who is intoxicated with marijuana? I think anything other than walking.
It's a pedal bike, and it's an electric bike, and obviously... I think you're just as dangerous in a pair of trainers as you would be on a pedal bike. I've never seen anybody harm themselves.
You can go a lot faster on a pedal bike, Michael, than you can, pedestrians have been killed by people on cycles.
You can, but once again, we don't have anybody leave the premises in an incoherent state. You don't have anyone stoned leaving a cannabis social club? People leave the premises stoned, but they certainly don't leave the premises and jump into a car and get behind the wheel of a car, jump on a bike off the face. How can you ensure that? How can you ensure that? We monitor every single person in that club. We're constantly watching people to make sure that they're not like over consuming, they're not having too much of anything. They're not over. We've got a lot of people with anxiety issues. We've got a lot of people that suffer really bad with autism.
How do you police? Oh, go on, Trina.
Sorry, butting in. Sorry.
Go on, Trina. No, go on.
If you've got anxiety, people with anxiety, mental illness, the cannabis is not doing them any good whatsoever.
We've actually got letters from people's doctors, from members' doctors, and we've actually got 2 letters from people that have attended, not the actual job centre, but the people that are in charge of the ESA that state that they should attend the Cannabis Club on at least 2 occasions out of the 4 nights a week it's open for their own mental health and well-being. These people have previously been withdrawn in themselves. They've been prone to self-harming or delusions since they've found themselves to be part of a community and part of somewhere where they can be accepted and consume cannabis and control.
Well, we're going to beg to differ.
Trina, can I just very quickly ask you, because we're going to get to news in a moment, but do you ever get the feeling that you are losing this battle, that your position, the one that you're taking, when, as I said, you've even got police and crime commissioners saying that we have lost this battle, do you not feel as though perhaps there needs to be a middle point between your position and Michael's? Because currently where you stand and where he stands with the full legalisation, you're so polar apart, but it seems as though
Trina. We want regulation in place.
It seems the world is moving more towards Michael's position and leaving yours behind.
Well, in my feelings, I feel it's very sad that people have to turn to drugs, have to turn to cannabis, and this.
People enjoy it. not everybody who smokes weed, Trina, ends up with mental health issues. Some people enjoy it, just like some people enjoy a glass of wine or they enjoy playing five-a-side footballs. For some people,
moderation is key.
That is the way that they unwind.
Yeah, all right, we're going to beg to differ, but I'll stick to my way, and we'll see how it pans out. See what the long
I wish you all the luck with your son as well, Trina. I hope he continues to make the progress that he's making.
I wish you luck in a, half-hearted way, I suppose, if I'm honest. But you don't know what the long-term effects are going to be on all this. And if they bring, if it is brought
there is
in
harms
as legal,
associated, Trina, but what we want is harm reduction measures. What we want is full regulation. We want regulation in place so we can have harm reduction measures in place. We can have education right from the ground, right the way up. We don't want this to be a case of where people are blindly just following people blind. We want people to be educated and have the tools equipped.
We're running out of time. Just very quickly, go on, Trina, ask that question.
How much do they smoke in a night?
Pardon?
How much do people smoke in a night, Michael?
Well, at that club, individually, everybody's different. That's like asking how much do people drink in a social club.
But wait a minute. But you were clear, weren't you, that you would stop
in terms
people
of
from smoking? Yes,
well, what one person smokes that might be too much for one person isn't enough for the other. What we do is we monitor people in between people smoking and people eating and people drinking.
What test do you apply?
If people are looking at you dazed and confused, it's usually a sign that they need to stop smoking. Just like if someone was incoherent when they're drinking.
And you'd let them ride a bike home?
No, we wouldn't let them. We take them into a separate room where they get some fresh air. We give them a sugary drink. We give them some chocolate. We sit them down for an hour or two, and once they feel safe and they're ready to leave, then we'll get them some public transport, either a taxi or a bus, or if they are, like I said, not in a state where we wouldn't be concerned about them hiring a bike, we would lease them a bike.
Okay, Michael Fisher and Trina Whittaker, thank you. Lots of text coming in. That's 85058 is the text number. Michael Fisher runs the Teesside Cannabis Club with his partner Christine Taylor. If you have any questions for Michael, then please do get them to us on the text. Right, Alison, my apologies. It's now 24 minutes to 2, and here's Alison with the news headlines.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. President Trump's agenda has suffered a blow in the midterm elections after the Democrats won control of the House of Representatives. However, the Republicans gained a greater hold in the Senate, the upper house in Congress. Police have described an attack on a 98-year-old man in North London as brutal and senseless. Peter Golston is in a life-threatening condition after being robbed at his home in Enfield. He was found yesterday, but it's believed he was attacked on Monday night. 2 men have been jailed for the manslaughter of a 15-year-old girl who died after eating a meal from the Royal Spice takeaway in Oswestwhistle in Lancashire. Megan Lee had a peanut allergy. Restaurant bosses Harun Rashid and Mohammed Abdul Qudus have been sentenced to 3 and 2 years, respectively. Marks & Spencer's food, clothing and homeware sales are down, but profits have risen 7% in the past 6 months, partly because of the sale of some less profitable stores. That's the news. Here's the sport now with Will.
England's cricket has bowled out Sri Lanka even on day 2 of the first test to move into a really dominant position in Gaul. They have a lead, England, of 177. Ben Foakes hit a century earlier on, making 107 as England eventually fell for 342. Foakes becomes only the second England wicketkeeper to hit a ton on debut. Joe Root's side then dismissed Sri Lanka for 203, with Moeen Ali taking 4 for 66 before England closed on 38 without loss. Jack Leach got a couple of wickets too, and he wasn't surprised to see Foakes excel.
I've seen what he can do in the Lions. I've seen him play in spinning conditions before and score a lot of runs. So, he just played at his tempo, and I don't think he might have given one chance at short leg, sharp chance, but it was a proper knock, and he should be very proud of that.
More reaction with Jonathan Agnew and Michael Vaughan in the TMS podcast, available to download now. Manchester United's Champions League winning goal scorer Ole Gunnar Solskjaer says Paul Pogba and Jose Mourinho have a duty to put aside any personal differences for the good of the team. Pogba says he's been unaffected by having the vice-captaincy taken off him and doesn't regret returning to Old Trafford ahead of facing former club Juventus tonight.
Both people that we're talking about, it's their duty to make it work. When you play for Man United, you don't have any time for any personal grudges. We've had players not speaking to each other. We've had managers and players not speaking to each other. But as long as you do your job properly and you get the best out of each other, I have to say Jose's record of getting results and getting performances out of players there's not many better.
Commentary from Turin in tonight's 5 Live Sport from 7, as well as updates of Manchester City's game at home to Shakhtar Donetsk. Goalkeeping coach Jennifer Hurst has been put in charge of Everton Ladies. It follows the departure of head coach Andy Spence. Scrum half Richie Myler has been recalled to the England Rugby League team for Sunday's third test against New Zealand. The Leeds halfback takes the place of Sam Tompkins, who's out with a broken hand. Forward Joe Greenwood is set to make his debut. England have already won that series. There will be a new Formula One race in Vietnam for the first time from 2020. It'll take place on a street circuit in Hanoi.
This is the first new race since Bernie Ecclestone's departure in early 2017 and illustrates Liberty Media's desire to have more city centre street circuits in F1. Street circuits, though, are not easy. Creating the tracks is incredibly expensive, not to mention the political and community support required, illustrated perfectly by the struggling project to have a Grand Prix in Miami. But if there is racing on the streets of Hanoi in 2020, it'll be Liberty Media's biggest achievement since they took over Formula One.
That's our F1 commentator Jack Nicholls, and the Lawn Tennis Association is facing a loss of around £7.5 million for 2018. Documents seen by BBC Sport warn that the LTA is facing a financial black hole because of this year's anticipated losses combined with last year's confirmed £4.7 million deficit. That's the latest from BBC Sport.
5 Live Sports.
Football on 5 Live. How many toes are broken at the moment?
2 now. The young lad did it on a Friday.
You're tackling on a Friday?
I just give him the look that he knew to leave me alone for a minute.
Harry Kane had a blinging pair of boots on last night, didn't he?
Yeah, what was the point now?
Is there a better natural striker in the Premier League than this man?
I'm not adverse to rolling my sock up and lashing it off someone's head.
Are you about to put your headphones down and storm out?
Well, professionally I can't.
It's only a game, but we love it.
Today I'm joined by Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola.
I will be Mancunian for the rest of my life.
Welcome to the Football Daily Podcast.
We are the squad.
That Peter Crouch podcast.
Still to come on the Monday Night Club.
Good morning, Mark Hughes.
Good morning, Seth. How are you?
Very well. Can I call you Sparky now? You're not my boss?
I'm not sure you can yet.
Football on BBC Radio 5 Live.
So here's the thing. Good afternoon, by the way. It's Nihal. It's 19 minutes to 2. Here's the thing. Cannabis social clubs. I'd never heard of these before. And as you can imagine, or maybe not, well, I don't know why I would say that, but, you know, I've grown up with people, smoke. I don't quite understand, though, how legally they can exist. Because you can go online and find them very easily, and membership, etc., etc. So essentially, the question I have for you is this legalization through the front door? Now that there are over 150, apparently, cannabis social clubs around the country where people meet up, they bring their marijuana, their weed, whatever you want to call it, with them. They then share with other users in a quote-unquote safe space. So many of you have been texting in. 85058 is the text number. Genuinely not a kind of clickbaity, you know, the usual conversation that everybody has about marijuana and should it be legalised or not. It's actually more about, are we already there? You know, if these things can exist, is it a case that if there were just more police officers, more resources, they wouldn't exist? Or is it actually an admittance by the police, certainly, that the war on drugs is not being won, it will not be won, therefore, we might as well allow those people who wish to smoke marijuana, not create any static, to go and do it, rather than feeding criminality. Sean Moore on Twitter said, as mental health professional of over 30 years, this man, talking about Michael Fisher, who runs the Teesside Cannabis Club and is a guest on the show alongside his partner Christine Taylor. Anyway, this man is talking absolute rubbish. Cannabis not only can cause psychosis for some, but also the sheer draining life energy out of habitual users. Depression is a bigger side effect. But as Sean Michael pointed out, it's in moderation. who says what is moderation, I guess. I'm 32, professional, a higher taxpayer, says this texter, and suffer from anxiety. I smoke cannabis regularly and find it relaxes me and calms me. I would vote for full legalisation and regulation of the industry, which is what Michael Fisher is asking for. Paul in York says people trafficking and weapons smuggling happen everywhere in the world and generate billions for criminals. Should we legalise those things as well to take them out of the hands of criminals? Well, Paul, the point with that is, of course, is that you can argue that if you legalise marijuana use for private individuals, they're not doing harm to anybody else. If the supply chain is legal, paying taxes is like any other business, like the alcohol business, for instance. What's the problem? Weapons smuggling and people trafficking, clearly huge amount of victims associated with that. Victims who have no control, especially with people trafficking, over their own destiny. Whereas with this, you're talking about grown adults making a decision for themselves. Just putting that counterpoint to you, Paul in York. Chris in Rotherham said the cannabis clubs are also breaching council laws on smoking in an enclosed building. Michael, that's a good point as well. How do you get around those? Michael?
Just using smoking in enclosed buildings. Obviously, it is technically another regulation, another issue that we've got. We follow the Spanish model in terms of the same kind of extraction systems they use in the Spanish model. That's what we have installed in the clubs around the UK to try and clear some of the air. Well, not clear some of the air, we clear all of the air. And it's regenerated with fresh air on a regular basis. So that's all we can say. All we can do is make it as safe as we possibly can, and we follow regulation that we see in other countries and what they've done in other clubs and in other models to make sure that we abide by what they're currently doing in Europe.
Okay.
Obviously, Amsterdam's a different kettle of fish, but in Spain they have a very similar system to what we're currently trying to operate under.
Right, so if you're just tuning into 5 Live and you think, oh gosh, maybe with the US midterm elections, I haven't realised that they've just legalised cannabis in this country and I was having a good conversation about cannabis social clubs. No, that's not the case. It is still very much illegal in this country, and the possession of the drug can get you 5 years in prison. But it is estimated that there are over 160 of these cannabis social clubs in the UK. Hadi Al-Dinza joins us right now, who's the Police and Crime Commissioner for Derbyshire and the National Lead on Drug Use. Hadi Al, very warm welcome to 5 Live.
Thank you.
Why is a blind eye being turned to these clubs?
It's interesting. I mean, I didn't even know about cannabis social clubs until about 6 or 7 weeks ago. And what I understand is that the risk and threat that policing has to always think about appears not to have generated any action by police forces up and down the country against cannabis social clubs. And having been sceptical about them, I understand they are membership organisation. They have a strict regulation and control of what they're doing, and it appears that if that's not creating a risk and threat to the public and others, and therefore I don't think any of these cannabis social clubs have been targeted or raided by the police, wherever they are in the country. And as you say, they are publicly known about. You can find out about them on the internet.
Yeah, you don't need to be D.I. Tennyson to try and find one of these by any stretch of the imagination, Hadi Al. So, as a police and crime commissioner, would you feel that any police and crime commissioner who allows there to be cannabis social clubs on their patch is effectively not doing their job and potentially not fit for purpose?
Yeah, interesting question, that one. This is a Police and Crime Commissioner has put the set policy and the priorities. Operational delivery of policing is the Chief Constables, who are advised by the National Police Chief Council about how they tackle all kinds of criminality. So it's up to individual Chief Constables to see how they do that. So that is always a prioritising that's going on. I would not want to condone any kind of criminality, and at the moment, cannabis possession and use is against the law. So I'm not wanting to sort of say that, it's okay, free for all. I'm intrigued by the concept that cannabis social clubs do exist. They appear to have a membership, and from what I understand, 60% of members are using it for medicinal type purposes, and 40% are sort of more recreational users. But they seem to provide a way of actually, and I think there's no.
I guess there's no real way of
conflict.
knowing that, really.
No, I don't know that. I'm saying this is what I heard. So all I want to do, I don't want to condone any sort of criminality, but I do need to see how we can actually have an adult conversation about whether there is a place for cannabis social clubs in how we tackle issues to do with drug use and demand. And we know that the police enforcement and the war on drugs you mentioned earlier, we're not winning the war on drugs. As we know with prohibition of alcohol, that didn't work. And as we know with tobacco, through education and regulation, we've had more success than actually leaving it free for all.
Do you think it's then only a matter of time until we legalise cannabis? Do you think it's not an if, it's a when?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some sort of move towards that, in my opinion. I mean, for example, the Home Secretary recently allowing cannabis oil being made available for people who have been suffering ill health, particularly young children that have been publicised with epileptic fits and seizures, and that medicinal oil, cannabis oil, is now being able to be prescribed legally. So that begins to say, do we need to distinguish the negative impact of herbal cannabis versus the positive impact? And is there a regulation and better control rather than leaving criminals to take commercial profit and also
but you'd have to legalise all of it.
Types of models of it.
You'd have to legalise all of it, really, wouldn't you? Otherwise, they'd still leave quite a large part of the market for criminals to exploit.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. That needs really exploring further.
But we've been exploring this. Hardiel, I mean, I know you said that we need, an adult conversation, but this adult conversation has been going on seemingly for a decade plus. It's not as if there's been any lack of conversation about this. So at some point, someone's going to have to do something. I mean, one of your colleagues, and I don't know if they're still the Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales, Arfon Jones, is very clear.
Yeah.
Said they've lost the war on drugs, and it will continue to fail unless there is a radical rethink about this. He has visited some of these places. He's now calling for Spanish-style collectives. I mean, this is from an article just in August. Apparently, he is still the PCC for North Wales. And he said, I support a legalised and regulated cannabis market with age restrictions and the personal cultivation of a certain number of plants. It has been clear for a very long time that the so-called war on drugs has failed. I'm sympathetic to the Spanish-style cannabis clubs, which grow their own cannabis for regulated consumption by their members. Now, that's a fellow police and crime commissioner saying what you're quite not willing to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I'm the national lead for drugs. So my role is to sort of get a consensus across police and crime commissioners.
What's the consensus, you think, at the moment?
At the moment, majority would be, I think, not for this process generally. This idea of cannabis social clubs is a way of actually better regulating and managing and sort of taking profit away from the criminals is being looked at. Arfon Jones and a number of other police are in the minority at the moment, but as the war on drugs continues not to make the difference in terms of stopping usage, demand,
you mean fail?
And supply, failing.
Yeah.
The sort of the interest in the views that Arfon Jones in North Wales and David Jameson in the West Midlands and others are saying that we should seriously consider is gaining more attention.
Okay.
And my job is to actually see how we can actually discuss that further and have a conversation in terms of how we progress this from just talking to actually looking at it in a more progressive way.
Yeah. Hardiel, please stay with us. Adi is in Norfolk, got in contact with us. Adi, thank you for joining us.
Okay.
I'm very sorry to hear about the loss of your brother.
Thank you.
which I mean, God, the guy, he wasn't even 40 years old. And you sent a text to us, AD. Tell me what you put in that text.
I basically said that I wish he'd had access to a cannabis club, because I firmly believe he'd still be alive today if he had.
Why? Make the link for me if you can.
Well, he was a regular cannabis user, social, with his friends, and happy, and he had his ups and downs, but it was only cannabis, and that's all it was. That's all it ever was. And then one particular evening, he was introduced to, I think it was ketamine at the time, horse tranquilizer. And then from that point on, I can list a catalogue of horrors and thefts and imprisonment, and he just derailed as a person. And it was purely and simply because of the company he was keeping at that time that he got introduced to that. Because one thing about my brother, he was a fun-loving guy, but he had no willpower. Right. And I believe if he had a social club, he would have enjoyed his cannabis. And your guest said, there's no other drugs in that other than cannabis. So he would have been happy somewhere to go, somewhere to socialise, and I do firmly believe he wouldn't have gone down that road that he ended up on.
I think that's counter to what a lot of people will think, isn't it, AD? Because some people argue that cannabis is a gateway drug to other drugs.
Of course it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, because it opens up doorways to other people. But if you're mingling with the people and you're socialising within that environment, I don't believe the other drugs are readily available. I mean, it all comes across when they go to the dealers and, well, I've got some, but I've got this. Do you want to, I can try a little bit of this, you can try a little bit of that, and then without the willpower, you just fall by the wayside.
So it's not so much the drugs. I think this is a very interesting take on this, AD. It's not so much a drug; it's the company that you keep with the drugs.
I believe so. I've got friends that smoke it regularly and never ever touched anything else. And to be fair, honest, they don't even smoke in the normal sense.
Oh, right? Yeah. I know people like that. Yeah.
And they've never dabbled. And I think because some of these people that my brother went on the wrong path with have changed their life around and are living perfectly normal, healthy lives, married with families.
Yeah.
But he never ever got out of that rut. And he could never get out of that rut. And eventually he went into remission. He was on, I think, methadone or something for years. And then one of these crowd, asked him years later if he could help them score, which he did. And he had a little bit of his own. And he died in his sleep that night.
AD, thank you for coming on to share your thoughts with us. And again, my deepest condolences.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Great show, Noel.
Cheers, AD. Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Richard is in Dorset. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Hey.
Now, you smoked a lot of cannabis, is that right?
Yeah, I did. I stopped about 11 years ago, I guess, because for me, it started having consequences. And I didn't smoke skunk. I just smoked black, resin, which you used to get back in the day. And
hot rocks burning things in your clothes and all that stuff.
Your t-shirt, the whole thing,
Apparently.
And it was just how I realised things were going wrong for me is I had a staffy who I absolutely adored, and I ended up shouting at him one day, and I just thought, this dog adores you.
Oh, I've got a staffy.
I know, exactly.
They're the most placid, lovely dogs. How dare you shout at a staffy, Richard?
He loved everything in the world.
Yeah.
He was a gem. And I can remember him looking at me and I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing? This is ridiculous.
But is that because... But Richard, if the smoking was in a social setting, so it wasn't in, someone's bedroom and it felt kind of like seedy and weird, but if it was in a social place where someone like Michael Fisher would come up to you and say, come on, mate, that's enough now, happy days, do you think it would have been a different experience if there had been a social club where you could have gone?
Well, to be honest, where I smoked with my mates, it was like a social club.
Yeah, that's what someone texted, isn't it?
There'd be about 5 or 6 of us, and you'd just be having a laugh. And like I said, it wasn't super skunk or any of the much more potent strains, if you like. It was just resin black, and it was great fun. But I had my time with it. I enjoyed it. I don't drink alcohol. like I said, I had lots of fun, lots of laughs, but I decided...
But not moderation, but not in moderation. And that's another point Michael made about moderation. Do you feel...
and I'm sorry, just to butt in.
Of course, Richard.
The boy that was on in front of you then, AD, I mean, it's just tragic.
Yeah, of course.
But also scoring was exciting. You know, you're going to these dingy places and these scary dudes, and it was back in where I came from in Wales. I mean, there were a couple of roads, and it was like, oh God, we've got to go and score. And like you said, there was always other stuff around. They were always saying, oh, do you want this? Do you want that? And me and my mates were like, no, not interested at all. And we'd leave. But that kind of side of it, and kids, I think, you get off on that. It's dangerous. You're 15, 16, it's like, whoa, my parents would kill me. But I don't know if it's a gateway drug, but it does expose you to other stuff. And let's be honest, if it's homegrown in this country and the lights or whatever, fair enough.
Okay.
But people always suffer when it's imported, somewhere down the line.
Richard, we've run out of time. We've got to leave it there. But just the last point from... Good to speak to you, Richard. Michael Fisher, last point from you then. How long do you think it's going to be? And you've only got about 25 seconds until you get what you want.
I think within the next 5 to 10 years, definitely we're going to see it coming. The government are already making the first steps with medicinal. I think we're going to see recreational in the next 10 years.
Interesting. Michael and Christine, thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon on 5 Live.